release the migrant crime data.
You've become one of the most visible members of parliament in the UK online.
Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick.
Excuse me, do you think it's all right not to pay? What, are you carrying a knife? Bike theft, phone theft, tool theft, all chipping away at society.
What does two-tier justice mean? What is that?
Earlier in the year, I discovered that our Ministry of Justice was seeking to create a different sentencing regime depending on the colour of your skin or the religion that you abide by. A small minority of judges who are essentially activists. They are tweeting. They're on the board of trustees who have overtly political objectives. Indicative data suggests that Afghan and Eritrean nationals are 20 times more likely to be convicted of a sexual offence than a British citizen. We have imported into our country people with frankly medieval attitudes towards women. Get them out of our country so they never step foot on British soil ever again. Congolese nationals are almost 12 times more likely to be convicted of a violent crime, and that Albanian nationals are 153 times more likely to be convicted of a drug offence. Experiment with multiculturalism, particularly the last 25 years, has been a complete failure, and we've got to change that now, urgently.
My name is Stefan Tompson. I'm the founder of Visegrad 24, and I am in London today interviewing Robert Jenrick, who's Member of Parliament for Newark, and he is the Shadow Minister of Justice. And Robert, I want to start off by asking you about all of the headlines that Europeans have been seeing and Westerners in general have been seeing about the UK, declaring the UK lawless Britain. What does lawless Britain mean? What is lawless Britain?
Well, look, I think that Britain is in a bit of a mess right now. You're seeing that in many different respects. There's flatlining economic growth. You've got a mad energy policy. You've got a housing crisis. But you've also got crime on the rise, and people do not feel safe on our streets. You've got record levels of shoplifting, of mobile phone theft, of tradesmen having their vans broken into and their tools stolen. There's a sense that some of these crimes are becoming almost decriminalised, that people are able to act with impunity now on the streets of cities like London. But it's not just London, it's across the country. And that there's a crisis of confidence in the police, in the authorities to step up and take action. And people are concerned, they're worried, and they're demanding action right now.
Do you think that it's an exaggeration to call Britain lawless? Is that just a turn of phrase, or is it actually lawless?
Well, that's how people feel. There was a survey just last week which said that almost 50% of people in the country now consider it lawless. Now, of course, that's not borne out in every respect by the statistics, but in people's everyday lives, they're seeing this. You know, they're seeing crimes where people are being stabbed, ostensibly for their watch. In London, they're seeing people having their mobile phone nicked on a single street in London, Oxford Street, the nation's high street. A mobile phone is stolen, I think, 18 times every day, or at least those are the ones who are reported to the police, and no doubt countless more don't even go reported. Across the country, shops are now having to put basic products like water behind glass screens so that you can't just pick them out of the cabinet and walk straight out of the shop. Now, I subscribe to the Rudy Giuliani theory of broken windows, that if small things are allowed to escalate, then one thing gradually leads to another. And overall, you see an erosion of the high trust society that I grew up in and that I want for my children and my grandchildren. I think we can be so much better than this. It doesn't have to be like this. What I want to see is the police actually doing their jobs, getting out onto the streets, arresting people for the crimes that impact everyone in their daily lives, not wasting time with policing tweets. You know, we've seen police officers knock on the door of journalists in the UK. There's the wife of a Conservative councillor, Lucy Connelly, who is in prison serving 31 months for a reprehensible tweet that she rapidly deleted. This is crazy. What we've got to have now is a criminal justice system that everyone can have faith in, and that means returning to common sense principles again.
Why do you think there's been such an increase in crime?
Well, I think the roots of it are many fronts. One is that the police have been distracted, doing things they simply do not need to do, and I want to get them back dealing with the crimes that affect us all in our daily lives. I think there is a crisis of confidence where the authorities are simply not taking action. Let me give you a simple example. People fare dodging on public transport.
You made a fantastic
I
video.
produced a video on this just a few months ago, which has been viewed millions of times. There were dozens of law enforcement officers out on the tube that day, but most were doing nothing. In fact, some even started videoing us producing a video when we started to apprehend fare dodgers because they were too timid. They were advised not to apprehend people. That's not right. We've got to have a different culture to that, where everyone steps up and takes action. And then there is another factor which I think is leading to an increase in crime, which is the consequence of mass migration, in particular illegal migration into the UK. Now, I don't pretend this is the whole of the answer, but I think it is a part of the answer that we are importing. I mean, importing is the wrong term because that almost implies that we're doing this by design. These people are entering our country illegally. They're breaking into our country. And the evidence that we have suggests that that is fueling crime, particularly violent and sexual crimes. And what I want to do is lift the veil on that. Be honest with the public. I am urging the government here in the UK to publish the statistics of crime by nationality, by visa, by asylum status, by country of origin, by how you got into the United Kingdom. And the indicative data that I have managed to get out of government by hook or by crook is very concerning. An Afghan is 20 times as likely as a British national to be convicted of a violent crime. An Albanian is dozens of times more likely to be convicted of a drug-related offence than a Brit. There are some nationalities which are less likely, the Indian nationals, Americans, Germans, but there are many nationalities that are far more likely, and we've just got to be honest about this. And then we have to design an immigration policy for our country which has one principal objective: keeping the British public safe. And that will mean tough decisions. It will mean that we should be granting fewer visas to those coming from some countries versus others. And everyone who comes here illegally, for example, on one of these small boats crossing the channel, has to be detained and deported within hours or days, not weeks and months, and end this merry-go-round of legal appeals where activist lawyers and judges, now frankly, are completely distorting the legal framework that we have enjoyed as a country, and this set of outdated treaties going back to the legacy of the Second World War, now which seem to serve the interests of people smugglers and illegal migrants, not those of the British public. Enough is enough.
One of the things that you talk a lot about, that you've certainly spoken about, is something that's referred to as two-tier justice. What does two-tier justice mean? And remember that most of the Visegrad viewers are not UK-based. So it's sort of, I'm trying to give them an insight into the United Kingdom. What does two-tier justice mean? What is that?
Well, look, when I think of the rule of law, whether it's here in the United Kingdom or anywhere in a civilized Western democratic society, I think of equality before the law, that we are all treated equally by the legal system. It doesn't mean equality of outcome, but it means equality of treatment. And unfortunately, in this country, we are seeing a growing number of instances where that simply isn't the case. Let me give you an example. Earlier in the year, I discovered that our Ministry of Justice was seeking to create a different sentencing regime depending on the colour of your skin or the religion that you abide by. So somebody who was a Muslim, for example, might be given a different, presumably a shorter sentence, probably a non-custodial sentence than a white Christian. That is completely wrong. That is the opposite of the rule of law.
But why was that
to
even
me.
suggested in the first place?
Well, I have no idea what was going through the thoughts of the judges and the civil servants who came up with that. Probably a misguided view that this is the way to correct historic injustices. I don't think you tackle racism by creating new injustices and layering on a new form of racism. That is the opposite of the approach that we should have. If there is racism in society, root it out. Don't infest our criminal justice system with new injustices and racism itself. That is completely the wrong approach. And you're seeing huge differentials in sentences, for example. Huge, where, let me give you an example. A man the other day in Hull, a city in the north of England, had 100,000 child sexual abuse images found on his computer. An appalling paedophile. The judge said to him, I'm going to give you a second chance. A counsellor's wife, Lucy Connelly, who sent one tweet, a reprehensible tweet that I do not condone, but nonetheless which she deleted immediately, someone of prior good character, sent to prison for 31 months and is not even allowed out to see her child, not even allowed to celebrate her birthday with her young child. That is completely mad. Or you're seeing, for example, the Grooming Gangs, which is this appalling scandal that we've uncovered latterly in this country, whereby mostly Pakistani men have been preying upon mostly white British young girls, subjecting them to multiple rapes, drugging them, beating them, abusing in the most horrific ways. Some of these perpetrators have been receiving pathetically low sentences, 6.5 years, for example, for repeatedly raping a young girl. How is that possible when you're seeing people going to prison for the same or even longer sentences for comparatively minor crimes? Something is going badly wrong in the system. And there seems to be, or have been over many years, a culture within the British criminal justice establishment which has said that people should not be going to prison, that this is not the right attitude, that we should be releasing people early, that it should all be about restorative justice and rehabilitation. No, don't get me wrong, I believe in trying to give people second chances and helping them to rebuild their lives and be productive members of society. But look, I want to get people behind bars as a matter of punishment and to keep the public safe. And I come to this with a very simple principle, that if you commit crime, you should be punished for it. And you should be in prison, not out on the streets with these ludicrous forms of alternative punishment like a tag, a rubber tag on your foot or your arm. That's not justice. That is not serving the victims. And so I want us to have a much tougher form of justice where we build prisons, keep more people in prison, and we keep the public safe as a result. And the last thing that I've come across, which is feeding into this climate of two-tier justice, are a small minority of judges who are essentially activists. Now, I'm a lawyer by background. I think the UK has always had a revered judiciary around the world, revered for its independence and its quality, particularly in some spheres, like in the corporate, the commercial courts, for example. People come from all over the world to find resolution here in the United Kingdom. That's a great thing. I want to nurture that. But we have come across judges who are entering the political sphere, who are making law rather than implementing it, and who a cursory examination of their past suggests that these people are not independent. They are tweeting. They're on the board of trustees of charities who have overtly political objectives. They're saying that certain politicians are beyond contempt, that laws should be repealed. This is doing immense damage to the reputation for independence and impartiality of our judiciary. And I, for one, am calling it out. And I want us to change this so that we are appointing people on merit and who are demonstrably independent, so we can restore the credibility of our criminal justice system once more.
I wanted to read the tweet, the Lucy tweet, because I think it's quite important context. This was posted on the 29th of July 2024, and I think also that when it was posted is fairly important because this is in the wake of the horrific attack in Southport by Axel Rudabakana. And what Lucy wrote is, "Mass deportation now, set fire to all the effing hotels full of the bastards for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it." I think that's quite important context that to know what she posted. And you brought up multiple things.
No, I don't condone what she posted.
No, obviously, of course not.
That's
not what I'm saying.
It was clearly a serious error of judgment. She did delete it.
Yes.
And she is somebody of prior good character. My point is that she should get a sentence which is comparable
Of course.
with those elsewhere. And it is mad to me that people who've done far worse crimes are in jail for, or indeed not in jail at all, when she's rotting in a prison cell for 31 months. And that is breeding a sense of discontentment with the criminal justice system, because people just think it's one rule for someone else, one rule for others.
Correct. And I wanted to bounce back on, you brought up the grooming gangs. And the grooming gangs, the horror of that is we saw these were crimes that took place over several decades and were completely and utterly ignored. And I read some of the transcripts from the courts, and I mean, some of it I was unable to finish reading because it was so horrific. And there's a sense that, certainly looking at, I no longer live in the UK, but certainly looking at it from the outside, there is a sense that the grooming gangs and the perpetrators of these crimes are not being sufficiently punished. And at the same time, here you have a woman who posted a very unfortunate post, which she deleted, getting 31 months. Why do you think, and why do you think that the grooming gang perpetrators are receiving what appears to be fairly lenient sentences? Is this, you think, is this a consequence of these activist judges? Is that an element
Well,
of
I
this?
think the sentences are far too short, and that is it may be as a result of activist judges. It's also that Parliament has set the wrong framework, and I want to ensure that if you are a grooming gang perpetrator, if you commit these appalling crimes, you go to prison for life. That is the least that we can do for the victims of these crimes. Get these vile men off our streets, and if, as in many cases they are foreign nationals, holders of passports from other countries like Pakistan, get them out of our country so they never step foot on British soil ever again. That's what I want to do. But the reason that this was covered up and not acted upon for years and years and years was because people, cowardly individuals, police officers, social workers, government officials, were too fearful of being labelled racist to take action. And we must never again be in that situation. And I myself have been criticised for this. I've done interviews at the turn of the year where I said that we have imported into our country people with frankly medieval attitudes towards women, and that this has fueled this kind of appalling violence, sickening violence against young girls. And reputable journalists, people at the BBC, have criticised me, essentially said that it was racist to make that comparison. Well, I stand by those remarks. I think that is exactly what's happened. We have allowed people to come into our country who have brought attitudes that are antithetical to everything this country should stand for. And because many of these individuals are not new arrivals to the UK, they're second, they're third, they're even fourth generation Brits, we have comprehensively failed to integrate people and to inculcate in some communities the sense of values and norms and respect that we should have done. And that has to change. It cannot continue. The experiment with multiculturalism that we have had as a country in my lifetime, particularly the last 25 years, has been a complete failure. And we've got to change that now, urgently.
There were a few headlines. There were 2 convicted rapists who were dual nationals, Pakistani and British. I can't remember their names. And they were going to be deported to Pakistan. They ended up tearing up their Pakistani passports, which means the British authorities could no longer deport them because they would be rendered stateless. What do you think about...
I don't care. I don't care if they shredded their passports.
Sure.
These people should leave our country. And so we should be putting them on the next plane to Pakistan, and they can go and live out the rest of their life there. I think one of the individuals that you're referring to has even used the money that he has earned through a combination of benefits and working illegally in this country to go and build a house in Pakistan. So if he's got a home in Pakistan, then he can go back to Pakistan. I want to see not just the grooming gang perpetrators who are nationals of other countries, but everyone who is in our country illegally deported. We've got to ensure these people get out of our country, and we reinstate the very simple principle that this country has borders, and we have limits. If you're going to come here illegally, or if you're going to come here legally and break our laws, you should leave. And the state has to reassert itself and make sure that happens.
A large element that appears to be blocking the implementation of such policies is the judiciary, right? And this is something you've spoken about a lot. And it would appear that the reason that many people cannot be deported, be they illegal migrants or failed asylum seekers, is that, and there's been ridiculous headlines. The Telegraph has run a fantastic series on this, documenting some of the most absurd cases of judges blocking the deportation of illegal migrants or failed asylum seekers. Are you familiar with these?
Look, I am, and it's completely ridiculous. And you can laugh about it, the person who can't be deported because their child won't be able to eat the chicken nuggets that they enjoy, the people who can't go back to their home countries because they won't get the treatment for mental health that they want. There are many, many ludicrous examples. Sure. But it's not funny.
No, it's not.
Our country...
It's tragicomic.
It's a joke, and the joke is on us, on the British people, and that has to end. It can be better. A different way is possible. What I want to see us do is wake up and take the steps that are necessary. We've got to reform our human rights laws. We are a party to a series of treaties that were created for noble reasons at the end of the Second World War,
sure,
like the European Convention on Human Rights, like the Refugee Convention. These are no longer fit for purpose, and they're not serving the interests that they were designed to. Frankly, the authors of them, like Winston Churchill, would turn in their grave if they could see what was happening today, if they could read those stories in the British press. They would laugh, but they'd also say, this cannot continue. So we've got to reform those. I want us to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. I've said this for a very long time now. I'm hopeful that my party will come to that conclusion in short time. And if we're lucky enough to get back into government in the future, do it as one of the first acts of a future government. But it is more than that, because we're capable of producing activist judges here in the UK, just as Strasbourg is on an international scale. So we've also got to put in place a very simple set of laws which put in place the principle that if you come here illegally, you get detained and you get deported. And that is as simple as that. I think we can do that. You see what's happening in some other countries around the world. Look at what Donald Trump has done in the United States. That has seen a dramatic reduction in the number of people crossing the border. A degree of this is about political will, the willingness to do tough things, but for the greater good. And I want to ensure that the United Kingdom, once again, is a country of borders. And the failure to control our borders has become emblematic of the breakdown of order of the state in this country. And millions of people are feeling immensely angry and frustrated about this because they are living with the consequences. It's them who are living beside 4-star hotels, which are now full of asylum seekers. It's them whose local councils are having to foot some of the bills for this, and whose communities are being changed beyond recognition, in some cases irreversibly. And many politicians in Westminster have been blind to that because they're not living in those places. They're not subjected to that. It's not their children walking those streets fearful of the potential violence and sexual crime that might come from importing these people into our country. Well, I do speak to those people. I listen to those people, and I want us to take action because this cannot go on any longer. The patience of the British public has snapped. In fact, it snapped a long time ago. It's taken politicians far too long to wake up and see that.
You mentioned Donald Trump, and one of the issues that Donald Trump faces is the American judiciary. It would appear that wherever a conservative or right-leaning or right-wing government appears, be it Israel, be it Poland, be it Hungary, be it the United Kingdom potentially, be it America with Donald Trump's recent victory, there is an issue with the judiciary. So how would you reform? How do you counter the power of activist judges without breaking the law?
Well, look, part of this is that Parliament has to step up and reassert itself. We in this country have an unwritten constitution, and at the heart of that is the concept of parliamentary sovereignty, that in the end, Parliament makes the decisions. It's not about the judges. It's not about international courts either. It's our own domestic parliament. And we have allowed that to be degraded over the course of recent decades, in particular in the period since Tony Blair became our Prime Minister, when a culture of human rights and adherence to international treaties took hold, spawning an entire industry of activist lawyers and human rights charities. I want to change that. I want to bring that era to a close and return to the kind of country that we were before then, where Parliament is in the driving seat, able to pass clear and unambiguous laws in which the courts then have to get on and implement. If we can do that, then I have confidence that we'll be able to take these tough decisions to control our borders, to get foreign criminals like murderers and paedophiles out of our country, end this nonsense which is driving the British public mad and leading to such terrible consequences for people. If there are a minority of judges who want to be activists, then we'll have to take action. And I've said that we need a much stricter approach to how we appoint judges and how we monitor their performance. And if they are passing judgments consistently, which are out with the law, or if we find that they are also entering the political sphere on their social media or whatever, then they need to go. They need to go. And we've got to make sure that the elected politicians and ministers are actually in the driving seat, making the decisions. Because I think it cuts to a bigger issue facing this country and many across the West right now, that countries like ours are facing huge challenges, whether it is a lack of economic growth, so people feel hard up, or whether it's mass migration and its consequences for communities. And there's a general sense that nothing gets done, that voting doesn't make a difference, that no one is willing to grip things and change things for the better. And that is leaving people feeling deeply frustrated and disillusioned with the political process. And so politicians like myself, political parties like the one that I'm part of, have got to change that. We have to be able to get on and do the job and enact change. And that will mean reform of how the state operates, reform of the courts, reform of the civil service, so that elected ministers are accountable to Parliament and to the people and are able to get things done and turn countries like ours around once again.
One of the most symptomatic things I think about the decline, or the sense of decline in the United Kingdom, is that my generation, millennials, and certainly Gen Z, feel that they will be objectively worse off than their parents, and certainly worse off than their grandparents. And I think this is whenever I speak to friends of mine who've stayed in the UK, that's certainly a recurring theme, and a very interesting thing that's happened over the last few years. So, as you know, I'm half Polish. Many of my friends who moved to the UK for better prospects, a better future, are now saying, well, actually, I'm going to pack my stuff and I'm going to return soon to Poland, because the converse appears to be true in many Central and Eastern European countries, of a sense of millennials being definitely better off than their parents, who witnessed the transition from communism to free markets, and most definitely better off than their grandparents, who were imprisoned by the Soviet imposed communist dictatorships that ran those countries. So it's very, very sad. It's, for me, on a personal level. I mean, the United Kingdom was a country that provided our family with shelter, refugees during the war and after the war, and then unable to return to Poland because of communism. So I have a great love for this country, which provided my family with a huge amount. And seeing it in the state that it's in is really it's very upsetting, actually. It truly is. There's this sort of sense of complete, the other sort of main, again, one's talking about feelings, but there is a sense of it's directionless. It was, it's lost complete and utter confidence in itself. And the English, or the British more broadly, no longer know who they are. And one of the figures that you've spoken about, and you've made some fantastic social media videos, it's very exciting that you've become, you are probably one of the most interesting examples of a British politician, of a Western European politician, aside from maybe Zoran Mamdani, whose social media is absolutely outstanding.
I like his social media, not so much the politics.
Correct. But you've become one of the most visible members of Parliament in the UK online. You've made these incredibly punchy some of them sort of on the ground. It's almost YouTube, like you're almost like a sort of the first YouTube savvy member of parliament. You made a very compelling video about Lord Hermer. And I'd like you to tell me about, we've spoken about the activist judges, we've spoken about two-tier justice. I'd like you to tell me about Lord Hermer and who this man is who's become a prominent figure in this government.
Yes. Look, I think this man has become almost emblematic of the present government here in the United Kingdom. This is somebody who is a very close friend and associate of the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, personally appointed by him to the cabinet to serve as the government's chief legal advisor, the Attorney General. This is a man with a distinguished legal career. But almost every client that he has represented in his career is someone who hates our country.
Could you give us some specific examples? I know you give them in the video, but...
Gerry Adams, someone who was closely associated with the IRA, widely seen as a IRA terrorist sympathizer. Shamima Begum, someone who went out to Syria,
the Islamic State,
and was part of ISIS. Caribbean nations who seek hundreds of billions of pounds in reparations from our country for what happened during the period of the empire. People associated with the 9/11 attacks, terrorists. He's someone who has campaigned on issues which are completely antithetical to everything that I love about this country. And yet he has found himself around the cabinet table. I find that astonishing, that someone like that, with that record, would be around the cabinet table of the United Kingdom. And he seems to have this view of international law that it should take precedence over the interests of our own country. So he's much more concerned about his reputation in international legal circles than the basic security interests of the British people. Let me give you an example. He has advised the Prime Minister, we are told, to give the Chagos Islands British sovereign territory on which there's a very important strategic base, which the United States in particular uses to project power in the Pacific, to Mauritius, an ally of China, endangering the long-term future of this base. And for the UK to pay billions of pounds for the privilege of doing this to Mauritius, to the point that Mauritius is now cutting taxes for Mauritians at the expense of British taxpayers who are hard up. This is the most astonishing decision. And the only rationale that's given for it seems to be that there was a non-binding decision by an international court, the International Court of Justice, which we didn't need to abide by anyway, but which Lord Hermer believes was more important than our own strategic interests. And he's also unwinding the immunity that the last government gave to British servicemen who served in Northern Ireland during the period of the Troubles now, so that men in their 70s and 80s will be hauled before the courts and live out the last days of their lives, fearful of being sent to prison for alleged crimes that were not even deemed to be crimes back in the day when they served as young men, for reasons I simply cannot fathom. And this man seems to have extraordinary capture upon Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, who prizes international law, prizes his own respectability over the basic security interests of the British public. And I think it's a total disgrace. But to your point earlier about what's happening in the UK, look, I share much of your concern. I think that the UK, like many other Western countries, is in a real mess right now. We've got declining demographics. We've got public finances that are very weak. We have mass migration. We have asymmetric multiculturalism that is presenting immense challenges in terms of integration. We've got a terrible energy policy with net zero that's deindustrializing our country and impoverishing people. We've got a housing crisis that young people can't get on the housing ladder. I could go on. But I am fundamentally optimistic about the future of this country. We are a great country. We are a strong country. We have made, like a number of Western countries, a few very big mistakes in recent years. Net zero, embracing mass migration, having an economic policy which has chased away talented people from this country and raised taxes to the point where people like your generation do not feel that hard work and enterprise is going to be properly rewarded. What we have to do is acknowledge the mistakes of the past, and my generation has to bring forward a different approach which unwinds what I would argue is the order that began with Tony Blair 25 years ago in this country, and bring forward a new one which fixes that small number of very serious mistakes. If we can do that with the leadership that is required, I think we can turn this country around and we can be a great country once again. But it will require a fundamentally different attitude to some of the biggest issues facing this country than we've seen in recent years. And I think a total generational change in the leadership of this country.
I share your optimism, and I think I share your optimism partially because I'm a Catholic, and it would be very un-Catholic of me to not be optimistic. It's a very deeply un-Christian attitude to be a pessimist. But, and this will be my final question, because I know we need to wrap up. In terms of my generation in the UK, there is a phenomena that we've witnessed since October 7th that has been deeply concerning. And this has gripped every single major Western city. We have seen massive marches described as pro-Palestine, but including people who've openly chanted support for Hamas, for the Houthis, for Hezbollah, and even, unbelievably enough, have seen posters supporting the Ayatollah on the streets of London. It's literal banners being held up with the face of the Ayatollah calling for be on the right side of history. I believe I'm quoting that verbatim. The other phenomena that I wanted to link that to has been a return of sectarian politics to the United Kingdom that haven't really been seen, well, since the Troubles and then since Cromwell, and in the form of 4 Gaza independents being elected on platforms of just support for Gaza. And Adnan Hussein is obviously perhaps the most visible of those 4 members of parliament. How do you... Well, I guess the question is what's it like to sit in the same benches as the 4 Gaza independents?
Well, I share your concern. I don't want to live in a country which is rife with sectarian politics.
And this is you agree that it's sectarian politics?
Of course, yeah. Of course. These are people who are being elected predominantly on a Muslim vote, whose manifesto seems to have more about what's happening in Gaza or Pakistan than in Birmingham or Bradford or Leicester. I am elected to serve the United Kingdom, not Pakistan. I want to have one country under one flag, and that is the Union flag of this country. I do not want to walk the streets of Birmingham and see the flags of pretty much every country other than our own. This has got to change. And so we are going to have to acknowledge that multiculturalism has not succeeded. We've ended up with a heavily divided country, with some people leading segregated lives in almost ghettoized communities. And we're going to have to stop making it worse, which is the first thing that we can do, which is by ending mass migration. I want to see a cap on legal migration here in the United Kingdom. So we bring the numbers right down, give the country breathing space after this disastrous 25-year period of very high levels of immigration, control illegal migration so people stop breaking into the country. But then we have to face up to the altogether harder question, which is how do we bring the country back together? How do we unite and create a sense of national togetherness and a sense of what British, English, Welsh, Scottish, Northern Irish identity actually means? It does not mean platitudes like we saw in the Blair-Brown era, the rule of law, freedom of speech, democracy. Of course I believe in all of those things. But they're things that most Western democracies, you would hope, believe in. It doesn't also just mean weeding out the absolutely disgusting, egregious issues that some of these individuals and communities have brought into our country, like cousin marriage or Sharia courts. Of course I want to remove all that stuff. I want to ban much of that stuff because I don't want to see that in our country. That is not British to me. But it also means a much higher degree of integration, indeed assimilation, whereby people who live in this country become conversant in our norms, our customs, our manners, our history, our heritage, our language, our food, our culture, our landscape, our literature, so that there is once again a very strong, deep, visceral sense of British, English identity once more. And that will be the project of a generation, I think, to bring the country back together again and instill a deep sense of national togetherness and identity. And that's something that I want to lead in this country, because without it, I worry for the future of our country. And I don't want that. I think we can be better than that. I want to build a country for my children and grandchildren, which has that love of nation that I grew up in, to working class parents who'd been born in the 40s and the 50s here, and who were given the gift by their parents of a love of this country and a sense that it is a great country. That's what I want to build once again and hand on to the next generation.
And I wish you all the very best with that. Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you.